Cool. All right. Well, it's a minute or so after, so we'll dive right in. Welcome. My name is John Ruggi. I'm our VP of Marketing here at BlockSpaces, and yeah, I want to welcome you to our second live interview and AMA that we've started doing this fall. If you missed our session a couple weeks ago, we got to talk about the Lightning Network and really dive deeply into that. So if you want to catch up on that, we're going to share that recording on Twitter, Discord, a couple other places here pretty shortly. So be on the lookout for that. But today we're going to dive into how Web3 and blockchain work in a business context. And we're going to dive into some of the challenges that businesses face in integrating those Web3 protocols into the Web2 software that they typically run their businesses on. So there's no one better to do that, at least in my view, than Rosa Shores and Chris Tyler, who are here with Drew, Dana, and I today. So Rosa's our CEO and co-founder. Chris is our Chief Product Officer. So they both have a pretty good depth of experience working with businesses on adopting blockchain. So before we get any further, I want to give you guys a chance to introduce yourselves. So Rosa, let's start with you. Can you tell us a little bit about your background? And then, well, Chris, we'll ask you to do the same.
Yeah, so Rosa Shores, CEO and co-founder, as mentioned. I've been in this space since 2012, so a very long time adopter. Obviously, there was nothing in 2012 but Bitcoin, so kind of watched the evolution of this whole space over those years. And started doing some custom development and consulting out of BlockSpaces' original kind of iteration, which was really an innovation hub for startups and people and developers that were working on projects in this space. We started doing a lot of custom development and consulting in the 2017, 2018 kind of area. A lot of that was incoming businesses that were first interested in adopting this technology. And we saw, some moderate success with that, certainly some proof of concepts that were that showed fantastic efficiencies and solved lots of business use cases. We are a very agnostic kind of mind frame at BlockSpaces, and so we think there's sort of this spectrum of blockchain now, so we don't really align ourselves with one component or another within this sphere. But we really saw that there was some massive challenges, certainly with Web2 developers, what we call Web2 developers or enterprise developers, deploying these kinds of solutions in-house without the need of having some sort of consultant or custom development going on. And we just felt that that was a big problem to be solved in this space in order for some of those proof of concepts to do something other than just show a lot of great efficiencies for the mangoes they were tracking. So we wanted to create something that was easy for enterprise developers to use. Like I said, develop potentially proprietary applications for their businesses and then easily integrate them up into their legacy applications. We think this is a world where those two kinds of technology stacks are going to live together for a really long time. So in a nutshell, that's it. I also am the former vice president of the Florida Blockchain Business Association. We focus on lobbying for reasonable regulation in Tallahassee around this technology. Also part of the Ag Innovation Working Group, looking at how blockchain can be used within the food supply chain, as well as a member of the blockchain task force for the National Produce Marketing Association. So a lot of focus on business applications for this technology.
So Rosa, you've been in the space longer than most, and certainly when you talk about people being obsessed and interested in a topic, that you fit that bill.
Yeah,
probably better than anyone. So cool. Chris, can you tell us a little bit about more about your background?
Yeah, so I've been in software development and software sales for, 30 years now. I spent prior to coming to BlockSpaces, I spent about 16 years with IBM, working a lot with their data and analytics portfolio, working actually with software vendors that were going to integrate those. So I have a very strong integration background. Since about 2016 or so, I was working with IBM's blockchain group as well, which is how I came to meet the BlockSpaces team and Rosa and Gabe. And anyways, saw some of the successes that IBM had in the blockchain world, but also a lot of the challenges that they faced. And Rosa mentioned a few. We'll talk about a few as we go. But I was looking at how is blockchain as a technology going to be used in a business world. IBM's business is their middle name, right? So anyway, so how is blockchain going to be brought into businesses to improve business processes, improve transparency, and so forth? Again, saw some great successes, but saw a lot of challenges as well. We'll address some of those. Here at BlockSpaces, I am Chief Product Officer. I'm working on some of the great technological products that we're bringing to market, right, that integrate blockchain into business processes, right? So how do we make it easy for these businesses to adopt this great technology? So a little bit about myself.
Yeah, really interested to dive into that later. You have such a unique background being within IBM, working on the blockchain side of things, and now you're, of course, on the outside and can kind of give us that external perspective. So excited to learn more about that. So, all right, thank you both. We're gonna before we kind of dive into the topic of today, just a quick reminder on the format. We're breaking our session into two parts. The first is an interview with Rosa and Chris, which Drew and I will lead, and then a bit later on, we'll shift gears to an AMA and opening things up for questions that you all might have for Rosa or for Chris. So if you want to take part in that, it's very easy. All you have to do is just click the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen and drop your question in at any time. There's no need to wait until the end or until we shift gears. Once the that thought strikes, drop it in the Q&A, and then Dana's going to moderate those questions for us when we get to that point. So, all right, onwards. Rosa, I want to start with you. As you mentioned, you've spent many years, working with enterprises that were trying to use blockchain in one way or another. And one observation, we talked about this a lot, ourselves, is we've just seen how much media coverage there is at the moment about crypto and speculation and all the drama that's been happening with the collapse of exchanges and bankruptcies and whatnot. We're recording this in November, so we've seen a string of this throughout the year, not just FTX. But I think what's overlooked in all of that, beneath all the speculation in crypto itself, is the fact that there's real utility that blockchain offers and real world problems that it is solving and is designed to solve and can solve. So why don't you walk us through why you think there's so much attention paid attention to that very narrow corner of the space? And if I'm a business person thinking about blockchain, what do I actually need to pay attention to instead?
Yeah, so it has definitely been an interesting year, although not necessarily the most interesting year. I think that one of the things that people lose sight of in these things is that blockchain, starting with Bitcoin, is an actual technological innovation. And what did that technological innovation solve? Like what makes it an innovation? And all of that, was kind of brought to the fore with Bitcoin. Bitcoin becomes a really important conversation. Anytime you talk about blockchain, no matter how you feel about Bitcoin, you have to recognize that was the beginning of this technological innovation. And what that solved really high level was kind of two kind of long-standing computer science problems. Double spin problem, which means how do I take something that's in a digital form and make sure it's not copied? If I take a picture of myself and send it to Drew, he can send it to Dana, he can send it to Chris, he can send it to anybody he wants, thousands and thousands, millions of times. He can copy that piece of digital information over and over and over again. The other thing that was always a computer science problem in a digital world is how do I, and even a larger world, is it's called the Byzantine generals problem. How can I get consensus around a group of participants who I need to collaborate with on something, but I don't necessarily trust? And so these are kind of like computer science problems that had existed since computers existed, that computer scientists were trying to solve. Bitcoin solved both of those problems in this unique kind of technological way. And really the innovation of Bitcoin took a bunch of existing technologies that already existed and just put them together in a very unique way, which solved those two long-standing computer science problems. So in those two computer science problems that I just called out, if those things are solved, you can think of all kinds of different ways across a digital environment where that problem might be a problem. And now we have a technology that it can at least put forth a solution to some of those problems. That brought forth a ton of innovation around all these different ways that this can be used. When you think about cryptocurrency, all cryptocurrency is, or all it's really supposed to be, is part of the consensus mechanism of the blockchain. If you think about what I just described as that Byzantine generals problem, how do I get a group of participants to collaborate around truthful information when I don't really trust any of these people? You know, and that can be trust. I'm not talking about trust like because it's my grandma. I'm talking about in a business environment or with a group of participants, how can I trust? So cryptocurrency is simply a consensus mechanism. It allows for, why would a group of people that are strangers that don't necessarily trust each other, why would they participate in this single source of truth ledger? Well, in the case of a crypto, or in case of blockchain where there's cryptocurrency involved, it's because they're being awarded cryptocurrency. So that's their incentive to participate. That has been taken to extremes in some sort. That has been that technology, because it's difficult to understand. We're talking about a technological innovation that most people don't understand. And because it's difficult to understand, it's easy to corrupt and it's easy to manipulate. It's easy to kind of put blinders on people. They can't understand. So all they're seeing is, hey, this is like funny internet money. And if I put my life savings into this, or if I mortgage my home, I'm going to make a bunch of money and I'm going to retire to Belize. And so we have like a lot of people flooding into this, what we call like mercenary money, the quick capital. How can I get rich? How can I win the lottery? How can I go to Las Vegas and win on the slot machine? And so it's like that kind of thinking that has spawned things like FTX. Did the notion of crypto make that environment possible? Perhaps, but that's not the problem of the technology. That doesn't distort the actual use case and value of the technology and all of the different ways that this can be utilized and will be utilized in the future, now and in the future. Yeah. So I would say, pay attention to it insofar as that's an interesting headline, in the same way that you probably paid attention to, Theranos going down, but we didn't all of a sudden say, well, I actually can't really solve anything from getting somebody's blood. Well, yeah, you can. Just because you have a bad actor and just because you have someone that has kind of corrupted the system for some reason, again, that should not be a reflection of the actual technological innovation that blockchain is.
Right. Yeah. A lot of it reminds me of the kind of criticism you heard in the early and mid 90s around the internet. You had all these .com companies that were overinvested in. So many of them went bankrupt or were no longer relevant. And it didn't mean that the fundamental technological innovations of the internet didn't have merit. Obviously they did, otherwise we wouldn't be doing this call over Zoom. But it's easy to conflate the two, right? And see, if a .com company is going bust, that must mean the internet is going bust. What you're saying is, just because the people have kind of distorted or misunderstood, or maybe been even willfully ignorant of the reasons behind crypto, and they've distorted its use case, and that's led to things like speculation and the collapse of exchanges. That doesn't mean that the fundamental technological innovations you just described that Bitcoin led, those are still there, and they're just as solid and relevant as ever. And it's through time we'll start to see those use cases and that utility come to light, and some of this speculation, kind of fade into out of the picture.
Exactly. And by the same token, I would say, we saw a lot, and Chris, I don't want to steal your thunder because I know this is a great thing for you to chime in on. But we were there, we saw, I was there for the Ethereum token sale, right? Like I was there. And so I know that there was a lot of interest in how can we use smart contracts? How can we use, Ethereum based products? How can we use Hyperledger Fabric, which was a protocol that was kind of put forth in 2015, I think it was, by the Linux Foundation. So, how can we leverage this technology? There was a lot of pile on from businesses that were like, I want to be the first to use it. I want to be the first to use it, do proof of concept. IBM, of course, completely productized it. Hyperledger Fabric, which is an open source protocol, but that when people say IBM blockchain, that's 99% of the time, that's what they're talking about. But so how can we productize this and then just smash it in like we do every other technology? And they did very successful proof of concepts that then failed. And people are like, oh, see, blockchain doesn't work. But that is a complete misunderstanding that when you're integrating a blockchain solution, it's not just about like, kind of like putting in that little piece of technology. You are talking about, how do I incentivize a network of participants? How can I get all of the rest of my ecosystem onboarded onto this protocol? How can there's a business thought processes that have to be put in place and changed before you can actually have a successful blockchain solution. And so just because that thoughtfulness was not put into the proof of concept, that is also not a reflection of the technology. That is a reflection of, this is something totally different in the world now. You have to think about it differently.
Yep. And that's some of the challenges that we saw with the proofs of concept that IBM was involved in, right? They were highly successful from a proving the concept. But when you went to go and try and operationalize that and scale that up to include more than your handful of participants that proved the concept, there was no incentivization. There was, no figuring out of, okay, how are people actually going to use this within the business process that this is supposed to improve, right? There wasn't a lot of thought put into that. It was like, look, we've got these large, enterprises that have limitless amounts of funds that, hey, they can drive this and everybody will come. Well, no, the people that want to potentially participate, there's no incentive for them to participate. There's no way for them to actually participate that makes business sense. So, that's why some of those proofs of concept, while they did prove that things would be better, they couldn't get it to scale up. They couldn't get the adoption that they needed, right? So,
Chris, remind me of what years were you at IBM?
So I was at IBM from, basically like 2005 to 2019, I think, 2018, 2019. I was working with IBM blockchain, which is built on Hyperledger Fabric from about 2016 to 2019. Actually was introduced to it by a partner of mine that, he was in the healthcare space and wanted to actually start leveraging that for the movement of patient information and movement of funds, right, for the payment of services and so forth. He wanted to leverage blockchain for that in the healthcare space. And he was asking me about it. I'm like, what's this blockchain thing you speak of, right? And so I started digging in and I was like, wow, this is really cool. And that spawned me getting interested in blockchain and voila, now I'm here, right? So I'm right in the thick of things. But so there's a lot of different industries that are looking at this technology. In healthcare, I worked in the digital rights and for music. Of course, supply chain is probably the biggest one, but lots of different industries were interested in it. And again, it's trying to figure out, okay, what business processes make sense to be in blockchain, and who are the participants, and how do I incentivize them to participate?
Yeah, that's really interesting. So you were there, and then you had someone else inform you about blockchain, and you had to ask what that was.
Yeah,
I'm curious, what, just as an organization, what was at that time, 16 to 19, working on blockchain itself, what was, as an organization, how did IBM view blockchain? What was the, culturally, how did they understand it? And I'm curious how that contrasts with what you've seen since you left and worked with, pure Web3 companies.
Yeah, so they really, they were one of the largest contributors to the Hyperledger project, right? So, and in particular, Hyperledger Fabric. They had a few spawned off projects as well, but Hyperledger Fabric was the key one that they were mainly the contributors to that open source project. And IBM immediately built a brand around it, built a whole product, built a whole marketing thing. I think it was actually part of the Super Bowl ads back in 2016 timeframe, right? That, everything was going to be changed because of IBM blockchain, right? And like Rosa said, people immediately started referring to Hyperledger Fabric as IBM blockchain. It's like, no. IBM blockchain was a service and so forth built on Hyperledger Fabric. But I mean, they all, jumped in, right? This is going to change IBM. And they had a huge organization, anything from sales, marketing. They were throwing money left and right at trying to pump this whole offering up. And like I said, they had some great successes. Walmart is probably one of those. And thanks to IBM and the cooperation with Walmart, Frank Yanis is now head of the FDA in the government because of the work that he did there at Walmart with food safety. But anyway, they spent tons of money on like teaching people about blockchain, or in particular Hyperledger Fabric. They had whole development methodologies that would result in these $1 million proposals for people to adopt blockchain, right? And they had some large customers, probably 90 plus of the Fortune 100 were working with IBM to adopt Hyperledger Fabric and blockchain in their business processes. And they had those successes, but they were always within that small group of participants around the main consumer of that, right? So Walmart had like their top tier suppliers that would adopt it. When you went to their whole supply chain, it's like, what's in it for me? I'm a small business, small distributor or something like that, what do I get out of it? And now I got to integrate my systems into that. And there was no way for them to do that. They couldn't afford it. They didn't have the technological resources and so forth. So that's where it started to struggle.
So
what do you think
a lot of what you, go, Drew.
I was just going to ask, what do you think could be done by the Walmarts or the IBMs of the world to get there because you mentioned it's basically like the big company in the middle adopting the technology, and they have trouble getting everyone around them to adopt it with them. What do you think can be done by the Walmarts or IBMs of the world to get all their partners adopted as well?
Well, that's the whole reason I came over here. Right? I was like, this has got to be easier. They were charging, at bare minimum, it was like $30,000 just to do a very simple integration into a system, right?
Right.
And that was the onboarding basically. Then you had to pay somebody to actually write code to integrate this. And they never really thought, okay, how can we make this fit in with the business systems that a lot of these smaller providers actually work within? They just said, no, you're going to use this brand new UI we built, which means you got to get out of the system. And they just said, no, we're Walmart. We can make you do it this way.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And to be fair, I also am a mentor at the University of Arkansas Blockchain Center of Excellence, which is sort of like ground zero for Walmart blockchain. And there are many efforts there's no like misunderstanding within that world of what the problem is, right? It's just like, how do we solve it? The tooling and the infrastructure doesn't exist. Like if you are a developer that's sitting in an enterprise and you want to connect two systems, you have so many choices that it's commoditized now, the MuleSofts and the Zapiers and the trays. But like, how do you connect two completely different technology stacks that need to exist to solve specific business problems? And I know we're going to do Q&A later, but I see, do companies have to abandon 2.0 to go to 3.0? Like that is sort of the assumption that a lot of Web3 companies are making now, that there's going to be like this, I don't know, like there's going to be a day, 1999, the whole world is going to turn to like Web3, just like it did with like the Y2K rollover, right? Like it's going to be some sort of event. And now we're all Web3. We don't think that's going to happen like that. In fact, I'm positive that's not going to happen like that. It's going to be, I don't even know. I think it's too early to say that this is even going to be a transition. We actually suspect that these technologies are going to have to live in harmony for the world for many years to come. We've never been in a time where we're talking about going from one type of web-based infrastructure to a completely different type of web-based infrastructure. So we propose that this is going to be not just a multi-blockchain world, but a multi-web world where these sorts of technologies have to live, in harmony for quite some time. Businesses just don't operate like that. They just don't turn off what they've been doing for so many years. There's businesses that still haven't adopted cloud. We consulted with businesses that were still doing paper manifests and literally writing, not even doing Excel spreadsheets, like literally paper. And so this technology assumption that all of a sudden we're going to be Web3 seems very pie in the sky to me, not realistic at all.
Yeah, you look at some of the Web3 technology, right? And, if you're going to try and just transact with another business, it's like, oh, well, give me your public key. And it's this big, long number. And it's like, oh, well, how do I know that's you? And there's a lot of this for uncertainty with businesses. And how do you make that world fit sort of into a way that businesses understand, right? And that's what we're all about, right? Is how do we make that transition? How do we make that dipping your toe into the Web3 world much less painful and much more understood in a way that you understand it? How can I work within the business system that I'm working within, but yet get the advantages of all this wonderful blockchain technology that I can share information, secure certain information. I can easily transact, and I can subdivide assets, and I can do all these things that blockchain brings to a business process that no other technology does very well, right? It does it quite well. And, how do you reduce costs from, business processes? I think IBM had another project, right, that was in the transoceanic shipping that proved they could basically eliminate paperwork from the transoceanic shipping, which saved not only time, but tons of manpower, tons of potential fraud, tons of potential risk of not having one piece of paper would hold a product, a whole shipping container in port for weeks, which meant that whatever was in that shipping container could potentially spoil, could potentially be at risk, and then lost revenue. So they showed that, just by adopting this shared ledger technology, that they could improve those business processes to the tunes of billions of dollars, every year. So
yeah. And the other thing that is really interesting to me is that we saw, and we still see, that this technology spurs all sorts of creative innovation, and there's lots of incredibly brilliant people in this space, the smartest people I've ever met in my whole life, and they are developing these really awesome solutions kind of in a vacuum a little bit, or they're developing them very vertically integrated. Like, I think I'm a business and I'm going to create a supply chain solution for whatever. And because I'm the latest and the greatest, I'm going to use blockchain. And so I'm going to go down, sell out my application that does track and trace. I'm going to go to this company. They're going to use my application that solves this track and trace component, and it's backed by blockchain. So company, buy my product and integrate that single application up into your business. Okay, well, blockchain is a technology that incentivizes a network of participants now, and solves this kind of problem that we have of these disparate systems, right? That there's all kinds of different things going on and nobody is communicating on a single ledger. So now when you do that and you vertically integrate like that, or you just have an application that vertically integrates and it doesn't allow for integration across multiple blockchains, potentially solving multiple business use cases in a single business process like supply chain. And think about supply chain. You have supply chain finance, you have track and trace components, you have logistic components. That's not necessarily all the same blockchain, but it does need to integrate seamlessly. So how can we live in a world where there's multi-blockchain, multi-web, and we're not recreating the problem, except now on a blockchain? Because if you just have a single integrated solution that doesn't coordinate with anything else around it, or doesn't easily integrate, you've replicated the problem that you were trying to solve on a blockchain, which is arguably worse. So we really envisioned, interoperability is kind of the name of the game right now. There's a lot of, I see Polkadot mentioned over here, Cosmos. These are blockchain protocols that are trying to solve this problem of interoperability of multiple blockchains, but that means that you have to adopt Polkadot, or you have to adopt Cosmos. There's always this kind of feeling that in order to solve this problem, we have to adopt an entire new technology. And now, like, everybody's going to do it. So these are problems that we're looking to solve with an integration tool that acts more that can replicate interoperability, but allows you to use multiple blockchains within your business.
Yeah, I think there's a couple just quick takeaways that I want to touch on just to make sure that our listeners are kind of capturing these things. Is you guys kind of touched on both of these, but I want to call them out explicitly. One is you talked about this, like it's blend of like Web3 technologies and Web2 technologies. And there might be some pockets or, some folks who have this view that like it's either or, right? Like we're going to shift our organization over to Web3 and all of our technology is going to be built in that space, or we stay in the Web2 world. And what you're saying, Rosa, and what you're saying, Chris, is it's really about you need both. And there's great things that blockchain does, but there's things that blockchain isn't good at. And so there's probably, maybe some people will disagree with this, but there's probably going to be a need for centralized, Web2 type products and services for at least the next, for the foreseeable future. That's not going away anytime soon. So it's not about shifting, it's about incorporating these things together. And I think the other takeaway is, Web3 isn't, there's not like a clean definition of even what Web3 is. So Chris, you talked about Hyperledger Fabric, a private, or, when we talk about permission blockchain.
Permission blockchain, yeah.
Yeah. So that's different from other protocols that are open and public.
Yep.
And so if you try to get a clean definition of what Web3 is, and you try to box everything into one or the other, you're going to get some gray areas. And I think people need to understand too, that there's different manifestations of Web3 and blockchain that are designed for different things, and taking a kind of a purist view or this like the view on the end of the spectrum where everything is public, non-permission, that's not what we're talking about either. We're talking about a spectrum of technologies that do different things.
Yep.
Yeah,
Definitely.
and I mean the full promise of Web3 is that the data gets transferred to the individual, right? And so we've kind of lived, that's like the ultimate promise of it. And really the only kind of technology that can solve that problem is blockchain. I mean, we just, when you talk about Web3 broadly, like, and how does that even relate to blockchain or crypto or anything like that? It just means that we're moving into a world in which the information, the digital information is in the hands of the user, so to speak, or the consumer, or the person that's actually using it. That's like the ultimate promise of it. That's why you're constantly hearing about decentralization. And, if you're remotely into Chris, when you hear not your keys, not your coin, this is all about like, you are in control of your finances, you are in control of your data. It becomes, how can we move into a world where these centralized data sources or these centralized systems of control are kind of flipped on its head, and the user has more control of their own data and resources. So
yeah, and whether you know it or not, right? When you shop on Amazon or you do any Google searches or whatever, right? You're giving up some of your data, right? And there are companies that use that for building machine learning models. They generate value off of your data. I worked with a company when I was at IBM that tried to flip that model where you could own your data and you could actually sell that data to companies that wanted to use your data for building those machine learning models for the Targets and the Walmarts of the world and the Kohl's and so forth, right? And so it flipped the model. Now I own my data and I could actually sell it to you. And depending on what bits and pieces you wanted, right, there was different value. If you want to know my address, well, that's worth a certain amount. And if you wanted to know my birth date, maybe there's and anyway, the blockchain technology allowed the owner of that data to actually delve that out to whoever they wanted, whenever they wanted, and then take it back when they were done, and if they didn't want them to have it anymore, they could take it back. And it's a piece of, it's that double spin, right? You can't do it. I have this asset. If I loan it to you, you can see it while I give it to you. But then as soon as I take it back, you don't have a copy of that information, right? So, that was some of the things that I worked on as well at IBM. So we had some interesting projects.
Yeah, and Rosa too, as someone like, because you're a member of different organizations, like you mentioned earlier, that are close to this. So I wanted to ask, do you see any potential role for like legislation or regulation in terms of getting blockchain technology, either public or private, mass adopted? Like what's the role you see there, if any?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's probably one of the biggest things that companies are watching, or what would make them even pause is this, what is happening in the regulatory environment. And that doesn't necessarily impact, the only way that it would impact anything that's somewhat of like what we call a permissioned blockchain would be, if I'm utilizing something that's utilizing a smart contract, is the contract legal? Like, so it can, regulation can impact it to that degree. Like, the things that we're deploying on these blockchain solutions, are they recognized as a legal contract or whatever? So those are some sorts of legislation that might broadly affect like private and permission chains. When you start hearing about like the massive regulation coming, and it's coming, you're talking about public blockchains and crypto for sure. And, things like, what is designated a money transmitter? What is designated a security? I think that if anything, FTX and BlockFi and all of this stuff that has happened this year, if anything, it will absolutely hasten regulation. It's certainly in the US. The US is walking a really fine line. We're already behind. We're behind the world in innovation on this technology. So the thing is that because it's a global phenomenon, right? Like you can just move, you're a company, you just move somewhere where the regulation is more aligned with your business, right? So we don't want to lose that kind of innovation in the United States. So regulation becomes imperative for anybody who is not just interested in putting this technology forward, but for anybody, I mean, and this is going to sound like so patriotic, but it's like anybody that's interested in making sure the United States makes sure and stays ahead of this technology, regulation should be incredibly important to be keeping an eye on. So I do feel like regulation will come very fast since this, I mean, it's been bubbling up anyway, but I think that what has happened this year will push that forward. Probably, I mean, I'm not a lawyer and I'm certainly not, a regulator, but my very strong feeling is the vast majority of these crypto projects will be deemed securities. And if they want to do business in the United States, they're going to have to comply with securities laws. That will not apply to Bitcoin. Bitcoin has already been deemed a commodity. There is no way they can deem that a security. Well, they can do anything they want, but that's not going to happen. It is sufficiently decentralized. Who are you going to subpoena? There's nobody, there's not a CEO, there's no company. And so it is effectively decentralized enough to where, it has been deemed a commodity, but it's the only one.
Cool. Yeah, lots to pay attention to. I saw just the other day, Belgium made some decision about certain cryptocurrencies that are classified as securities and certain cryptocurrencies that are not classified as securities. And I think Bitcoin was one that was not classified as such. But that's a good point, Rosa. Like there's, based on the protocol you're using and what you're using it for, there might or might not be legal implications. So a lot of nuance to unpack there, a lot to pay attention to. All right. Well, we've had a few questions come in and I want to make sure we have time to get to those. So Dana, do you want to share what we have queued up for us today?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is a question directed to both Rosa and Chris, and it's from Michael. And he asks, when categorizing the spread of blockchain tech today, the most common comparison that comes up is the spread of the internet in the 90s. As a 10-year full stack dev, he sees it more as a comparison to the early 2010s when businesses started adopting cloud infrastructure. His question is, do you have a go-to comparison of your own that you use when describing the shift we're seeing?
I think that the innovation of blockchain, of course, came about because of the internet, right? So, I mean, we're here where we are because of that. The cloud comparison is perfectly fine. It really is a comparison to any emerging tech. I think the main reason that the internet comparison comes up so often is because it's just a massive shift in how we do business, like how we think about how we do business, whereas cloud is, kind of a next generation storage component of this digital information. You could potentially say that blockchain is the next innovation of like a digital database, but I think it's more of a full shift in how we think about doing business. Literally hate to age myself when I say this, but I was actually a digital analyst at HSN before I left and went down this journey in blockchain. And I did kind of 2 tours of duty at HSN. The first one was in the broadcast division, and I was literally there when they launched hsn.com and sat in a boardroom and listened to them talk about how ridiculous it was that nobody was going to buy anything over the internet. How can you smell perfume? How can you try on clothes? It's like literally ridiculous. What are we going to do? We're just going to buy it to preserve our name. We're not going to do anything with it. And when I left HSN in 2017 to start BlockSpaces, they were doing, I don't know, 80% of their business on e-commerce. So like these things come very fast and furious, but it had to be a complete shift in thinking about new ways to do businesses, new ways to monetize, new revenue generation, new efficiencies that we're finding out that we can actually leverage this technology. And so to me, the comparison to the internet is probably more fair.
I would definitely agree, right? And you look at I remember writing the AT&T's very first web-based payment system back in like 1997, 98 timeframe, right? And, that wasn't that long ago. But then you look at how we use the web today, right? Where you've got all these web services and you've got the not only the RESTful APIs, but the RPC call. And it's just, we don't even think about it, right? You got all of your devices are interconnected, the IoT and all this stuff came about because of the way we thought about the communication, over this public channel, right? And I think that just that analogy or that comparison really ties in well with how we look at blockchain of this decentralized world, right? But just my 2 cents.
I want to interject. Anybody who's interested in where I feel like we are right now, watch a movie. I tell my whole team to watch it. So watch a documentary called General Magic, and it's about the true invention of the smartphone, which is actually not Apple. And so but it happened at a time with some of the brightest, smartest people in Silicon Valley at that time. Can't remember the year. But it was prior to us having any sort of infrastructure that could support this amazing technology invention. And so it likened it to having like a lot of light bulbs, but no power grid. And so if you invent the light bulb before there's a power grid, as amazing as that might be, it's not worth anything because you have no infrastructure to support that amazing innovation. It's literally what happened to the cell phone. You can watch this movie, watch it. It's called General Magic. It's amazing. And that to me is where we are right now. We have all of these like amazing innovations happening, but there's no power grid connecting any of them. And so these standalone applications, these standalone protocols, they just don't have the meaning they have because the infrastructure doesn't exist.
Yeah, and you even look at things like NFTs, right? And, people poke fun a lot of, at the crypto kitties of the world and stuff like that. But it's that, how do I create this light bulb before the power grid, right? So you got people that are innovating on how do we do these types of things, and they create fun things that are really cool and get early adopters excited about this. But you look at where that's going, and whether that's managing titles to houses, or whether that's managing the whole ownership of a vehicle for the entire life of that vehicle, or whatever it is, right? It's the adoption of these things like NFTs that are going to be the precursor to what's going to be 5-10 years from now. So
yeah, another great example of how like you hear about a sliver of something in the media with like art projects and things that have a lot of interest. But Chris, in the same sentence, you can talk about NFT, like you said, being a car title, or some like maybe much more boring application, but one maybe arguably with more utility. And so another great illustration of how like what you hear sometimes in consumer media is really different from like what people need to know about the underlying technology.
right.
Great. Thank you for your question, Michael. That was awesome. The next question I'm going to throw over to you, Chris. It's from Jared, and he wants to know, how important are projects like Quant Overledger, Polkadot, and Chainlink in connecting Web 2 and Web 3?
Okay, so like Rosa kind of touched on this a little bit earlier and so forth, and they do some things with regards to generating like Web 2 type interfaces to their blockchain, right? So, you know, you'll build your smart contracts or whatever, and then they'll expose those smart contracts generally up as some Web 2 RESTful API. But what does that mean? Well, you got to run on Polkadot. Doesn't, you know, no, I want to interact with Ripe.io, which is a supply chain blockchain in the food industry. Well, it doesn't help me out with that, right? If I want to interact with Hyperledger Fabric for Food Trust, it doesn't help me out, or Trust Your Supply, or whatever it is, right? It works great if I build my application or my decentralized application in those technologies. Works great. And then there was even something like Hyperledger Cactus, which is another interoperability technology that would help to make, say, Hyperledger Fabric talk to Ethereum or whatever, right? It was designed to do that sort of stuff. Well, it just meant that whatever protocol, if it doesn't adopt Cactus, then I can't have these things talk to each other. You know, I don't know if they asked, but the approach we're taking is, you know, we don't really, I hate to say we really don't care. We do care about the technology, but, you know, it doesn't matter whether it's Ethereum or Bitcoin or Hyperledger Fabric or Corda or whatever it is, right? We want to integrate that up into the business process, the business system that you're working within. So we take a little bit of a different approach. You know, again, those that are generating that Web 2 interface, it still doesn't do you any good if you can't make, you know, your system talk to that, right? And you talk to some of these mid-sized businesses, they don't know what to do with that. Right? Okay, great. It's got an API. What do I do with it? We want to sort of make that, you know, very trivial for them to leverage. So
that said, these are those protocols that you mentioned. They are trying to solve this problem. Like, this is a really big problem. Like, how do we integrate, interoperate? How do we make this seem more viable for businesses? You know, these projects are very important, and they're all trying to solve the same problem. Our thesis is just, though, that there doesn't necessarily need to be another blockchain in the world.
Right.
There doesn't necessarily need to be a new token. There's enough blockchains out there. How do we actually allow developers to build on any of them? If they want to integrate Polkadot, they can integrate Polkadot. How can they build on any of them? And then most importantly, how do they integrate them up into their legacy applications? And so, yes, those protocols are awesome. We will have the ability to integrate those if you need to be. So we are not a blockchain. We do not have a token. We integrate those solutions.
Right. And for those of you that, you know, like me, I come from that enterprise space. I don't see businesses getting off of ERPs anytime soon, right? These companies have basically built their businesses around these, right? I mean, even things like QuickBooks, there are small, mid-sized businesses that basically they run off of QuickBooks. They're not getting off of QuickBooks. They're going to stick with it. And, you know, it's just the way things are going to be for a while. Right. And so how do you let them continue to work in that world that their business operates on, but yet participate in this wonderful blockchain world?
Great. All right. Our next question I'm going to throw over to you, Rosa. This is also from Jared. He's submitted a lot of great questions. He wants to know, how do we as Web3 evangelists help create the value and urgency for companies to take the leap?
Web3 evangelists, I would say that, I will say that one of the things that I see reflected in this space, which is reflected in a lot of different endeavors that I've been involved with, is let's make sure that I personally feel like being a very hard-edged maximalist about any of these technologies is harmful to evangelism as a whole. I think that there needs myself, I can only speak for myself. I mean, I'm not dictating anybody else's behavior, but for myself, I feel like it's much more productive to recognize that we are going to live in a world that's not going to decentralize anytime soon, and that there's businesses and business processes that might remain that way for all of our lifetimes, right? And so how do we move people from this way of thinking about doing business and the value that these things can provide in a way that doesn't feel intimidating or threatening, and that makes it, these people, when a Web3 evangelist says, we're going to disrupt the whole thing, we're going to disrupt your business process, right? I've been working with enterprises enough to know that is literally like the worst thing you can say to a business. We think disrupt means innovation. They think disrupt means COVID. And it's like the way that we talk to businesses and help them understand that we are augmenting their existing business. We're making their business processes better. And I don't think we do that by spending a lot of time arguing about what decentralization means on Twitter, right? Like, I feel like if there can be more of a cohesive understanding that businesses operate in a completely different mindset and world than this Web3 environment, they're interested, they're excited, they're also very intimidated and a little bit nervous, and rightfully so, because there's a lot of aggression if you don't align with a particular protocol, align with a particular way of thinking, align with a particular, like, even way of eating when you talk into the Bitcoin space. And I think that a little bit more understanding of that businesses need to make a slow transition. We've done a lot of voice of the customer interviews. And one of the things that is resounding is that this is a very intimidating space, and they don't even, it's very nerve-wracking to try to put your toe into this space. And so having a place where you can just understand that, Bitcoin is not a bad word. It's a technology. Blockchain does not mean that I have to fully align with one way of thinking or another. It is a technology that allows businesses to have massive efficiencies, to move the world to a more decentralized place that is better for the world as a whole. I've been in enough consulting sessions to know that there are massive business problems out there that are caused by disparate systems and people not being able to collaborate across supply chains, across counterfeit drugs, across, counterfeit food. There are so many business problems that affect our lives every single day that could be fixed by this technology. So I think it's really important to understand that as a Web3 evangelist, if you're called to do anything, it's to encourage people to see that there's many different ways of thinking in the world. And this is just another way of thinking about kind of doing business. Yep. That would be my best advice.
I mean, if I'm a business and you tell me, hey, I can reduce the amount of time that it takes for you to send money from the US to Europe, I can reduce that amount of time and the amount that it costs you as a business when you're transferring, millions, if not billions of dollars. That's significant, right? So, but if you tell them, oh, well, you got to go and download this wallet technology and you got to have somebody copy and paste an address and hope that it gets to the right person. Okay, that's somewhat causes grief to businesses. So
yeah, and it's what we just did with our Lightning product, right? I mean, we absolutely love Bitcoin. We think it's the grandfather, so to speak, of this space. We think it has so many use cases and possibilities, and the value of Bitcoin is staggering. And so it's, but rather than focus on, we think Lightning is the thing that is going to drive adoption of Bitcoin because it just makes payments so much faster. It does do that what businesses needed to do, which is making those transactions happen at the speed of a credit card, right? And so that's the promise of Lightning. But guess what? Like, okay, so what does that mean to like a day-to-day business? What does that mean? Awesome. Okay, so what do I do with that? So we're going to integrate it into QuickBooks, or we already did. And so it's just like press a button, Lightning is now integrated into QuickBooks. You don't have to think about this massive technology stack that's behind it. We don't do that with anything else that we integrate into our businesses. So it just makes it easy to adopt in that kind of way that they can use it in their day-to-day business applications that they're used to using for many years.
Yeah, a lot of good questions. I appreciate all that thoughtfulness that goes into those. Dana, it looks like we've maybe got a couple more lined up. Can we get through those quickly while we have time?
Yeah, sure. So Chris, I'm going to throw this one over to you. This is an anonymous question, but they asked, from a custodial Lightning perspective, how is BlockSpaces handling the accounting side of the product functionality?
We're
Yeah.
not custodian.
Yeah.
We're not.
So
We're a non-custodial. Everything we do is non-custodial. We are not a custodial solution. We're a non-custodial solution for Lightning. I think probably our amazing Derek from our Lightning team spent quite a bit of time on that a couple of weeks ago. We can put maybe that link in the chat of his whole breakdown, but we are a completely non-custodial Lightning node solution. So
yeah, and
that's how we deal with it.
I think Rosa said this at the very beginning, right? It's not your keys, it's not your Bitcoin, right? We firmly believe that you should maintain, all of your assets, right? We need to have some, access, some level of access to move those for you in certain cases, but it's at your behest, right? And you're in control. But from an accounting perspective, basically, we sort of treat that node as a bank account, and we make sure that anything that happens on the node is represented in QuickBooks. Anything that you do in QuickBooks gets pushed through the node. We do that for you, right? But it's with you involved, right? So you as a customer.
Yeah, and non-custodial is a hurdle of understanding that I think is that's going to come with time. I think that's part of the evolution to this more decentralized world. The fact that the everyday person is like, what does non-custodial mean? And I don't know who asked that question, so I don't know that you're an everyday person, yet you're a normie that we say. But like, just that the fact that I have people all the time like going, what does that mean? What does non-custodial mean? These are awesome conversations. Which, by the way, we have, just to let you guys know, I mean, I think that this is a great time to even just mention this and do a little pitch. My partner, Gabe, and I have been running the Tampa Bay Bitcoin meetup since 2014, every week for the last almost decade, longest running and most active Bitcoin meetup in the world. He does that every Wednesday night, mostly virtual, but every once a month we do it in person. Check it out on meetup.com. These are the types of conversations that they go on till 2 o'clock in the morning talking about. So if these sorts of subjects and you want to like talk about this technology more, meetups are the best place in the world to go.
Yep, and Drew just dropped the link in the chat for everyone if you want to check out the meetup. I think we've got time for one more question. So Rosa, I'm going to throw this one to you. It's from Michael, and he wants to know, is it difficult to find devs and product managers with the experience to bring products to a production-ready state, or is it on par with any traditional Web 2 talent pool?
I would literally say that this is kind of the melding of the worlds, right? Like you have Web3, super innovative Web3 developers that are doing these innovative products, but they don't know necessarily, or have the experience of how do I bring an actual Web2 product to market? Is it hard to find devs? I think it's very hard to find devs that have that breadth of experience in both of those worlds, which is why our team has a very solid understanding of what it takes to do enterprise grade software, combined with a super innovative, hardcore, in the weeds R&D team. So I think in this world today, you almost have to just build a team that combines those two worlds. I think over time we'll have developers that have the foot in both worlds. It's going to be a while, and our solution allows a Web 2 developer to be able to integrate these technologies without having to have a deep understanding of blockchain.
All right, and we're hiring. If that's someone if you're someone listening who's up to that challenge, we've got a lot of roles open. We even have an evangelist role open. We were talking about that earlier. So if that's something you want to help us, get the message out, come talk to me, come talk to Rosa, our team about that. We'd love to have that conversation.
Yeah.
So, all right. Well, look, I think we're about out of time. So Rosa, Chris, thank you so much for your insights and sharing those today. And thanks to all of you who are here. Thanks, for asking questions and making this conversation kind of a two-way thing, not just a one-way conversation. Really appreciate that. And if you've got a moment to share some feedback, Dana is going to drop a link to a quick survey for you. I think you'll see it, Dana, correct me if I'm wrong, you'll see it when the webinar ends as well, when Zoom ends. But if you have a moment to share some feedback, that really helps us improve these sessions. Like I said, this is just the second one, but we're doing these every couple of weeks. So we'd love to hear how we can make things better. And then finally, be on the lookout for another interview in AMA coming your way in 2 weeks. So on Wednesday, December 14th, we're going to talk to Gabe Hibbins, our chief blockchain officer and co-founder, about everything that happened with Bitcoin in 2022 and his thoughts on 2023. So I'm really excited for that. So stay tuned.
He can tell you everything that happened with Bitcoin in 2012 too. So that would be, it would be a very, very interesting conversation.
Yes, yeah, for sure. Absolutely. Yeah, no, few people, Gabe wrote a book about Bitcoin. So among other credentials. So yeah, lots of expertise and experience to unpack there. So anyway, thanks for joining us. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we will see you all next time.
Thanks all.